Welcome, everyone. I'm Mary Thorsby, the Executive Director of ABODE Contemplative Care for the Dying here in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to ABODE Academy 6. This round of ABODE Academy is focused on preparing for grief, embracing it, and moving through it. This is the third in our series. We've held two beautiful workshops that help set the stage for conversations around grief. And we have two more sessions ahead, which I'll tell you about at the end of tonight. Before we begin tonight's session, Understanding Grief with Peg Armstrong, I'd want to tell our newcomers a bit about ABODE. ABODE provides a beautiful home, this one, as a matter of fact, and compassionate care for those at the very end of life. And we do it at no charge. We teach the art of contemplative living and dying. So while caring for folks is a key part of our mission, providing community education is also important to us as we have a vision to live in a world where death is not feared and we live fully until we die. If tonight's session blesses your heart in any way, we inspire you to visit abodehome.org/donate and make a tax-deductible donation to us. At ABODE, we always like to begin our meetings and gatherings with a contemplative meditation. We take a minute to get focused, to relax our bodies, to bless and release our stress, and to get ready to spend this special time with one another. So I'd like to suggest for the next 1 minute, we get comfortable, we feel one another's presence, even over Zoom, and perhaps pay a silent tribute to somebody that you have grieved for or you continue to grieve for. And just close your eyes, spend a minute thinking about that person, about what you loved about them, and what you hope to carry forward from them as you move on in life. So close your eyes for a minute, and I will ring the singing bowl when our minute is up. All right. Well, we are in for a special treat. Peg Armstrong has been a blessing to ABODE since it was a vision in the eyes of our co-founders, Edwin and Patsy Sasek, who are here with us tonight. Peg serves on our board of directors. She's always evangelizing our good work. In fact, she carries around a stack of our newsletters and she hands them out everywhere she goes to everyone she meets. She's just the best. Peg is a psychotherapist with a 40-year practice specializing in grief and bereavement. And that has been propelled by a personal early tragedy that she'll tell us about. Coping with loss is a major theme in her academic research, her training and teaching, and her work with her private clients and her own spiritual practices. Peg has studied psychology and philosophy with the likes of Viktor Frankl. Wow. You know that Viktor Frankl survived the Holocaust and went on to write Man's Search for Meaning. She's also studied with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, famous for her 5 stages of grief. And she's studied with Mother Teresa in person in India. So we're going to have a back and forth chat, but please feel free to use the chat box to add your own comments or ask your questions. And we'll also save time at the end to answer questions. Peg Armstrong, I find you absolutely fascinating. I would love for you to tell folks about your background. You are a Texan from birth.
I grew up in a town of 600, it took 600 families to run a company business. And I was a barrel racer. It's a little bitty high school, enough that I rode my rowboat from my house to the other end of the lake for junior high and high school. That's pretty much it.
What's the name of the town did you grow up in?
Well, no, you won't understand it because now Sugar Land, Texas is 2 miles from Houston. At the time, it was 50 miles, which meant it wasn't accessible. So we had a company store, we had company socialism. We had a company store, a company dry goods, a company doctor, 2 vets, 1 doctor. And it was just a sweet little town. And it was much more, as I understand history, more like growing up in the 30s. We just weren't up to the 40s yet. And it was an easy place. It's almost like, well, less than Leave It to Beaver, more like Okie. Everybody knew everybody. I demanded when I got back from college, a rite of passage was to get a house key, and I demanded a house key. And my mother said, well, darling, I think your father's got one, and it's behind the saw in the driveway. So I just, going off to Trinity University, you might as well have sent me to New York. I was just a country kid, had a horse.
And you ended up at Trinity University, one of our fine universities here in San Antonio, and
yes.
worked there for 17 years.
Yes, I did. I stayed on. It was very popular in the 60s when you weren't going to trust anybody over 30 to get kind of a child dean. And they made me head resident counselor when I was 22. And the kids, the students, were 18 to 21. So I was there a while.
Wow. Do we have some folks who remember Peg's?
I was one of them. I was one of the students.
Yes, and there's also my cousin. And Tom and I started in 3rd grade.
Was now an opportunity for you to tell us about what happened with Johnny, because that happened while you were at Trinity, yes?
Yes, and it's important because I already had my license. Even though the ink was still wet on it, I was minding my own business. I was counseling students, felt I was doing good for the cause. I was making sure Trinity didn't get in the papers in the 60s for drug, sex, rock and roll. And one day my father called, and my little brother and I had a very special bonding relationship. And I thought he was going to say Mother had died, which wouldn't have been easy. But he said, John's dead. And I couldn't understand it. I kept saying, what? And the significant place for me was I was with a new license. I was very clear on what's abnormal behavior and what's normal behavior. And I realized after Johnny died, that first year and a half, that if I had gone to a mental hospital and said, these are the kinds of emotions that I can't seem to get a hold of, these are the kind of things I'm thinking, these are the kind of things I can't seem to do, like remember how I get from my office to my home, got in the car and just didn't have any idea which way to go. I thought then, what is psychology? If I'd gone to a mental hospital, they would have said, well, come in, you're right. You've had a psychotic break with reality. And then if I said, the most important person to me in my family just died, they'd say, oh, well, that's grief and time will take care of that. And I thought, what is psychology doing to help in the 60s, early 60s, to help normal, stable people who have been hit so hard in their gut, in their mind, in their soul, in their heart, that they're having experience of being mentally ill. And psychology was doing nothing. Zip. You had to have an illness, and it was very embarrassing if anybody found out you went to a therapist. High functioning, normal, stable people didn't go to therapy. And I just quit my job and said, I'm going to open a practice, and I'm just going to see grieving people who, before they got the phone call, were fine. And now life has changed forever and will never be back the way it was. And I had colleagues who would say, well, Peg, I see people who've had a loss. I just treat it as depression. I thought, well, depression is a piece of it, along with fear and anger and longing and loneliness and shame and blame. Depression is just a piece of it. And fortunately, people recognize that who's here to help. So the practice worked. And I didn't have a back door. People knew if you're seeing Peg Armstrong, you've had a death. So there wasn't that stigma of you must have a back door so nobody sees you coming and going. But people would come and tell me things like, I think I'm crazy. It's not just depression. It's not just sadness. I'm doing crazy things. And so that's how I got into it. And then a strange thing happened. It was 1979, and some of you are old enough to remember, before there was AIDS, there was something called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. And the CDC had told President Reagan, but it affected people that were not of national interest at that time. So who started showing up were parents who were grieving even that their children were gay, much less that they're going to die. But these young men were going to die on if you remember, doctors would not even allow you to come into their waiting room, much less give you any medicines. And I thought, these boys are going to die on my shift. And I think I really do know about grieving. I don't know anything about dying, and certainly with no meds, with no doctors, with no medical. So that's how I got to India. Somebody said, well, I think 2 or 3 people a day die at Mother Teresa's, and she doesn't have meds. So I went there, and it's true. The body knows how to birth you out, and with no meds at all, the body knows how to birth you back out. It's just, aren't we lucky that we do have meds? So,
so at that time, the men who were dying of AIDS, there were no meds because they were not yet.
Doctors wouldn't even let them come to the office.
So you were faced with clients who were grieving, but also clients who were dying. And
yes, I felt like I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and that I had good education about abnormal and normal, but I didn't know anything about dying. So the practice, about half my clients were people who'd had a death in the family, the heaviest being death of children. But there is nothing harder to face in the whole human condition but mortality. It's more in the closet than anything was ever in the closet. People are terrified of dead, dying, and death. So I started the practice for grieving, and those were most of my clients. But very quickly, I was into dying people and their grief.
Right, and you have counseled over 3,000 clients in your time. Would you estimate?
That's a scary thing. Did I tell you that? Yes, I think so. Yes,
well, that's why we call you the preeminent grief counselor, for sure. So I'm curious, have you spotted any common threads among folks who come to see you for their grief?
Yes. Western world people, and Americans in particular, have been blessed to grow up pretty safe from anything like mass death or frequent death. And while most of my clients are Christian, but I have quite a few Jewish clients, even have a pagan, I've got Hindus and Buddhists. Christians got a heavy dose of Old Testament in Sunday school, and God rewards the wicked and he punishes, I just said it backwards. God rewards the righteous and he punishes the wicked. And there's a spiritual crisis to this. It's more than psychological. How could this happen to me? People at some point will say to me, how could this happen? I mean, we're good people. We're Christians, or we're good Jews. We've done the things right. How could this happen to us? And that seems to be, it's estimated that most people have not updated much of their belief system since catechism, bar mitzvah, you got the story and how it goes, and then you go on with your life. And there's an enormous spiritual, and then the work ethic comes in. We pay our taxes, we work hard, we give to the community. People almost always say, why would a loving God do this to me? Or to a 4-year-old who's dying of leukemia. There's a heavy, heavy spiritual, I don't understand life. It's almost as though the sun could come up in the west or gravity could give way. It is such a, I never even imagined burying a child. I never imagined being a widow at 32. So it, besides all the emotion, and it's heavy, the emotion, the newer book, but we've all known it, The Body Keeps the Score. There are people who have passed out cold when they got their phone call, or who projectile vomit. The body, it's more emotion than the human biological system can handle. People either start sleeping all the time or not at all. They eat all the time or they stop eating. They get into drugs or alcohol for the first time. Their digestive system, their bowel system, everything goes off. And so you put the worst emotional trauma that can happen to people with the fact that the physical body can't contain those kind of, it's not tears, people who sob until they pass out, people who cry every day for a year, people who cry all day, people who can't get out of bed. And then there is a neurological component. And I used to refer to it as bereavement brain damage. But we now know that from functional MRIs, not MRIs, but functional MRIs, where they put the electrodes on your brain, that in the same way, what happens in a stroke is synapses break between neurons and the messages don't pass. In functional MRIs, there are synapses that break between neurons and you can't run the pattern you used to run. And there actually is now it will repattern the same way people with stroke. The brain will find another way to run that. But for the meantime, it also has a neurological stroke-like phenomenon, which is really scary to people. They know they're not thinking right. It's not just like they can't find the car in the parking lot. They don't even remember what kind of car they have. So the trauma emotionally, then physically, then neurologically. I'm sorry? What?
I don't think anybody said anything. Did anybody?
Oh, okay. I'm hearing things. It's too much for the system. It just can't be contained. And so sometimes grief therapy is normalizing some things. When people will tell me, I think when a mother tells me that she wishes she would die, I have never checked suicidal ideation. It is actually a pretty good thought. You'd either be with your child or you'd be out of this pain. I've never put suicidal. I think it's sometimes very appropriate to say, I don't think I'm going to be able to go on with life with this. And to say, that's not out of bounds. That's not suicidal. Or to tell me things they're doing or things they're thinking or things they're not able to do. To say, I'll tell you if you tell me something that's out of bounds. And that is a big comfort, for one thing.
We have a question in the chat box or direct message. Do you see the same kinds of reactions between someone who experiences a sudden death versus someone who has cancer or other illnesses over the years?
Yes. But this is not a trick answer. It's almost like, would you rather die of fire or would you rather die of burning? When it's sudden, you will be in shock. And shock is not the best word. Disbelief. People say, I'm not in shock. I saw the body. Disbelief that this could be happening to you. So they stay in that. I do want Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages, and I can tell you why later. But when it's sudden, you're in disbelief for a very, very long time. When it's long and lingering, you're not in disbelief, but you are worn out at every level you can be by the time it happens, which makes you pretty fragile, physically, emotionally. So it's just which of the stages balloons out, depending on how the death happened. And if it's a murder, anger balloons out. If it's suicide, the blame and shame and guilt blooms out. It's just which of those stages is going to hold you locked there for longer.
Can you walk us through what your first session with someone is like, the types of questions you ask? And I imagine your counseling is so personal, but what kinds of things are you trying to gather? And from that, how do you know which way to go?
Even with the 6-year-old, I start with, where do you think your mommy is right now? That's usually my first question. Because if a person says, in a better place with Jesus, then I need to operate out of this framework. If they say at Sunset Ridge Cemetery, then we need to start with that. If they tell me that's the problem, I don't know, then we need to start there. So I start with, tell me where your loved one is right now. That's the first question. And the second question is to ask, what is your worldview? What's going on here? Where do we come from? What are we here for? And where do we go? And for everybody's spiritual system, that's a little bit different. But how did you imagine life would? Well, you get born with the sperm and the egg. Some people believe something before that. And then they'll say, and then I'm shortening it, but you try to become somebody, a good student, or get a good job and be successful, and your life, and life goes on. And then someday, a long time from now, we might have to think about the D word. But telling me what their worldview, when people say, I don't believe in anything, I'm an atheist. Okay, I'll need to start in another place. But it all is going this. What did you think life would be like? And how unbelievable is this to you? That your child died, that your husband died, that someone went to the grocery store and never came home. So I start with, where do you think they are? And what is your worldview of what's going on here, why we're here, what we're supposed to do, and how we're supposed to die? Old and not very happy with life anymore is what most Americans imagine. And there are things that happen, but they're to other people.
And then your sessions, do you typically see someone over the course of a year? I mean, I've always heard it takes a year.
A year doesn't do anything. A year got you through the first birthday, the first anniversary, the first Christmas, the first Mother's Day. You are not one bit better. And that is terrifying. I think one of the things I do to normalize is I say it very gently, but say, I want to give you a time frame. And first of all, you will never really be over this. You will integrate it. There's not going to be how long before I get back to normal. That's not going to happen. If we work hard and you work hard, you're going to become someone else who's incorporated this, but you're never going to be that person. But then I say 165 days will not do much. It's going to be about 2.5 to 3 years before you begin to find things that are joyful, before you begin to have this be something that happened to someone you loved. You did not die, and you don't need to sit in black. About 2.5, 3 years, which will scare some people. But when I say it won't be like this, we're going to make baby steps forward. But they need to know the time frame, or they keep thinking, what's wrong with me? And worse than that, some retarding things is that other people will say, for heaven's sakes, Grace, it's been 6 months, which is nothing if you're still in disbelief. Or people who say, Mom, it's been a year. You know, when are you going to want to go back to bridge and go back to church or whatever? So normalizing the time frame, because other people will give you lots of messages. And look at the workforce. You're allowed, Trinity used to have a sheet, and if it was immediate family, you could have 3 days off plus the funeral. If it was a neighbor, zip, you'd have to take vacation pay. This is how well it was misunderstood. Well, 3 days, now let's get back to work. And this was not uncommon to have a sheet of what human resources would count as how long you get off.
I wonder if that's changing. Have you watched to see if companies are having more realistic policies around that?
Depends on the company. I had an elementary school that sent me a little boy whose daddy had died and said he just stares out the window. He's not paying attention. We would like him to see you. And they called me after the first 6-week semester and said, he's not any better. He's 6 years old. This child is embedded. He said a wonderful thing when I said, where do you think your mommy is right now? And he said, it doesn't make any difference. I said, why is that? He said, she isn't enough here for me. And that's where, even if you can say they're in a better place or they're fine, you're not. This is not much help to you. It's a little help to say they may be fine, but it doesn't help you. So I don't know. Yes, certainly people, there are more of us doing grief work. There's ABODE. There now are degrees in thanatology. There are doula classes. Yes, people are getting more knowledgeable, but they still get impatient after about 6 months. And so one of my normalizing is this is a longer process than you're going to think.
Changes your life.
Yeah, forever. And our understanding of forever, even as adults, you will never be who you were, but you can become something richer and deeper as you understand self-compassion, as you understand it's happening every day all over the world. There are grieving mothers and grieving spouses and grieving siblings.
I'm curious, Peg, what is your definition of grief?
I don't know if I have it. I'm going to go back to what I first said. It's the heaviest emotional thing that can happen to you. a blindsiding like you'd never had before. But I don't want to minimize grief, but there are other things that are grief. Divorce is a grief reaction. It's dead on arrival. Amputation is a grief. You didn't die, but you're going to be a one-legged man here forever. People whose their grandfather was a doctor, their dad was a doctor, they're going to be a doctor, and they didn't make the cut to medical school. I mean, there were kids who were ready to end their life over things like that. It's just the hardest stab in the heart and the spirit, breaks your spirit. I couldn't do it for the insurance companies, but they always wanted my diagnosis. And it wasn't going to fly to say their spirit is broken. I never put, I put situational grief. If this hadn't happened, because situational anxiety, if you put anxiety on a record, it will go with you the rest of your life, you have anxiety. I always wrote situational grief, situational anxiety. If this hadn't happened, this person wouldn't be here. And insurance companies are not very sympathetic about that.
Yeah.
You've pretty much got to see a psychiatrist or an MD. They're not very understanding. In fact, the new Edna, there is the diagnosis called uncomplicated grief. Complicated grief they may pay for, but not uncomplicated. I don't know what uncomplicated grief would be. I can't even think what it would be if somebody died. Granny, if she was 90 and wasn't with us really anyway, I don't even know what that would be. All grief is complicated. It breaks your heart, it breaks your mind, it breaks your spirit.
What would you recommend for those of us who have friends who are going through grief? Ted asked, what is our best response to a friend? Do we say, I'm sorry, I'm sad? Wayne recommends we really don't have to say anything, just.
Well, the practice, some of you have heard me say this about going to Mother Teresa's. I wanted to be in her training program. Show me how you, and she did have 3 or 4 people a day. And we had a nursery as well, filled with dying children. And they were, not a single person was ever leaving. These people were just brought and left on her doorstep. And the body knows how to do it. Mary, what was your question?
How we can be supportive.
Oh, the mother training. Well, I was already, show me what to do. And she went to each person and she took their hand and she smiled. Smile means the same thing in Hindi and Buddha. She held their hand and she did not break countenance with her. She just was, it's a New Testament, what she witnessed. You don't need to say anything. There's nothing good to say. Just show up and be with them. Presence is what they need.
Right.
That was the training program. That was it. She moved from person to person. And I thought, well, and they got what they needed. And when she did it in the nursery, I thought, this isn't going to work out. She's going to pick up a baby. She's going to look it right in the eyes. She's going to keep touching it. She's going to smile. She's going to be reassured. She's going to put it back. And I thought, and then they're going to, it just didn't happen. She was so present. They all just watched her go to every other place. That was the training program. That's all we did.
Yeah, we've certainly learned that at ABODE when we go in and spend time with our guests. The important thing isn't necessarily what we say. It's just that we're there and that we're present.
Just say, I wondered if you'd like a little company, and be real okay if they say not really.
Absolutely. As you're counseling folks, what are you hoping that they gain from their time with you? What do you hope that they'll take away and move forward with?
Well, this is going to sound like, what are you paying for? I'm going to keep you company while you grieve. No psychobabble. We're not getting into how your mother toilet trained you. I'm going to keep you company, but I am really good company with grieving people. I have a lot of experience with it. I have a lot of training with it. I've had mentors, as you said, like Viktor Frankl, Mother Teresa. I'm very good company when people are grieving, and I won't get tired of you talking about Jimmy. And your other friends will say, God, I hope she didn't bring him up again. I want to hear your stories. I want to point out how you changed the verbiage from the last time you told me the way it happened, that it softened a bit, or, and you're going to pay me, but I'm going to keep you company while you grieve. That's it. But I am really good company. And other people don't seem to be able to do it very well. And sometimes it's their husband or wife. Men and women don't grieve in the same way. He doesn't want to talk about it at all, and it's all you can talk about. He doesn't ever want to go to the cemetery again, and you want to go every day. And it's families get very, I know what I want to say. Grieving is much more a spiritual and emotional walk than it is a psychological walk. What I hope they take away is more compassion for themselves and for other people. I hope they come to a place where they can incorporate what happened in their life as certainly a great tragedy, but it's something that happened in their life, and there is now lots more years to your life. What shall we do? How long do you want to live as the bereft mother? Which for about 2.5, 3 years is just fine. But when people come in, it's been 8 years. That's a harder idea.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Can you talk about healthy grieving versus unhealthy grieving? How
I think healthy grieving looks pretty abnormal, and abnormal grieving looks even more abnormal. I watch everything. I watch when people get out of the car, whether they slouch toward the front door, how disheveled they are. I'm watching. I'm equally alarmed if they show up looking like they're in the fashion show for Saks Fifth Avenue. It takes a bit, frankly, for me to identify this is not moving forward. We are not. And sometimes while I say I only see high functioning, normal people who have grief, sometimes people are bipolar and their son died. Sometimes there was stuff going on there before this happened. But I guess the unhealthy piece would be sleeping all the time, not sleeping, eating all the time, not eating. For me, one of the, I had lost contact with time and space when Johnny died. I would think after work, I just need to go sit on the back porch, just 15 minutes to kind of transition. And a friend would come say, Peg, don't you want something to eat? And I said, I told you I wanted just a little time. They said, I know, but you've been out here 4 hours. No concept. Or I'd be in a meeting and I'd think, my Lord, I mean, meetings don't go on for more than about an hour. And I think, how long is this going to go on? And I've only been in here for 4 minutes. Losing contact in time and space. Once had a woman who drove into my driveway and she sat there And she sat there and she sat there and she put it in reverse and peeled out. If you come in the door, we're going to have to talk. But I give you wide berth to say what's abnormal. I don't know. The whole thing is pretty abnormal. So I cut people very wide berth until I've seen a pattern of something that doesn't seem right. But I don't make any judgments. Like I said, that they tell me they'd rather be dead. Yeah. Yeah. I understand.
And where do you go from there?
I'm good company. There is an art to it. There's an art to it. There's some science to it. But can you hear it? Sometimes they need to tell you what they saw when they got to the accident scene. And a lot of people can't sit through that. Can I hear them say things? My training was y'all who are older, my training was you should never care more about your client than unconditional positive regard. And when somebody tells you what it looked like to watch their 4-year-old die, I would think, what is wrong with me? Tears start. I actually realized it was, do you want to tell somebody the most awful thing you've ever seen? The body came home in a bag. And I said, really, tell me more. I think they need to see that as a therapist, I can barely hear what you're telling me. And that is the healing in itself.
Beverly has asked an interesting question. What makes people better or more resilient to grief? Have you found that some folks are more resilient than others, and do they share certain characteristics?
A spiritual path of anything, although I'll tell you, it doesn't hold up. You can say, well, I'm Christian, I believe, but it doesn't help me that they're okay with Jesus. But we can at least start with how you thought it was before you. An awful lot of Christians think God has betrayed them. This was not this cannot be a loving God. This cannot, if they have a spiritual path about anything, we can move forward much, much faster. I'm in some trouble, not with when a Jewish person says I'm a cultural Jew. That means I keep the habits, but I don't go to synagogue, and I'm not much a reader of our sacred text. When they tell me they're an atheist, when they say I don't know, I thought I knew what happened when people die. We just need to broaden their idea of the cosmic spirituality, the cosmic Christ, or a much more cosmic God figure, because the Santa Claus didn't do it right this time. So I can move much more quickly if they believe anything. Pagan will work fine. They glorify earth, air, fire, and water, and the ethers. But if you have no spiritual practice, it's going to be a forceps delivery. And I do like to see people, a minimum, I need to get through that first year, because every month has got something. This was when they were going to graduate from college. This was, so about a year and a half. And how often I see somebody depends on how well we're comforting each other. Most people come once a week for about a year and a half, but sometimes after about a year, we go to every third week or once a month. And sometimes people come back for a booster shot. Somebody else died and it brought it all back. So I let them call the shots. I don't like when doctors say, I want to see you 2 weeks from now. I just say, how often would you like to come back? And some people I've said, would you like me just to be kind of on a retainer? When you get stuck, you call me and I'll work you in. But most people come in therapy for most issues, divorce too. Most people come once a week.
I have a message here. I find myself getting angry a lot easier than I used to. This is after the death of his mother. Any advice on how to handle this other than it's a stage and you'll get over it?
It's very hard that other people are going on about their bit. When you're riding in the car behind the hearse, other people are turning into Incarnate Word. They're going to school. They're going to Central Market. Did nothing stop? Everything makes you angry. A friend of yours starts telling you about how their husband is irritating them and you don't even have a husband. Yes, it makes you angry. You should be grateful you've got one. Things do tick you off real easily. And people start saying, I'm so upset. You know, the fender benders, like, you don't even know upset. Yes, it makes you angry. And that is one of the stages, because you want to find blame. Is this the doctor's fault? Somebody screwed up. Is this God's fault? Worst of all, is it your fault? You were a bad mother? And all sorts of, I should never have let them have a car. Well, you can't really do that. You know, I should never have let them cross the street. How a mother gets the nerve to let a child cross the street is just beyond me. It's just such a risk. So I think anger is appropriate, both as one of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages, but also that other people, what they tell you is breaking them, is baby legs to what you're dealing with, or that people are going on and you're not. So sure, you're angry.
And that's okay.
And a lot of people don't think much of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, like, she's old hat. We've had at least 10 updates of a better way to phrase it. And the reason I've never bought into them, people know what disbelief means. They know what anger means. They know what bargaining means. They know what depression. To talk about reintegration, people don't know what that means. Or to say your worldview has disintegrated. It's like, what? I like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross because people know the words. Now, she could have, what she didn't write, but people weren't going to buy a 1,000-page book, is it doesn't go disbelief, bargaining, how did this happen, if only I had, if just it were, anger, that sometimes you've moved all the way and suddenly it's something kicks you. You're already getting into acceptance and somebody makes you very angry. And she couldn't have written, it's good enough to say, basically, you're in shock and disbelief. Then you make deals with God. If just you'll bring this back, it's not rational, but I'll build a wing to the church, or you're going to build a medical wing if the doctors will just, all sorts of deals you're going to make to make this not true. And you can move in and out of those. Sometimes you find out something, you were getting better, and then you find something that there actually were quite a few charges to jewelry stores that you don't know about. Boom. That will set you back. Or you found out alcohol was involved, and you just, it was, accidents happen, cars, and that takes some shame and blame so that you can get kicked around. But I still think she's right. Basically, it moves this way.
You're talking about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Yeah, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And the others to me are rebranding. Mm-hmm. They're just new names for the same thing.
Here's a question from Beverly. If you didn't deal with your grief and you went back to work, you went back to your life without working on it, will that grief come back to you at some point?
Yeah, what are guys in Vietnam? It's all very nice to say, now you're in disbelief. Now you're in shock. You better keep running. What are you to tell a mother who's got 3 kids under the age of 12 and her husband died? You can't sit down and work on your disbelief. And fortunately in San Antonio, you have a children's bereavement center, which is wonderful. But yes, if you move right along saying, I got it, I'm okay, shit happens, which is just about the best explanation. Accidents happen. You can't always deal with it at the time, but yes, it will come back somewhere. Someone else will die, or the cat will die and you go to pieces. Something will happen that breaks your heart open, and you realize. Sometimes I ask people, what was the first death that ever happened to you? And it's almost always a mess. It was an animal that died and the parents that got run over, and the parents said that he ran away. They can't believe their kitty ran away. Or it was a grandmother's death and you were forced to go. And it was too big for you, the casket. And sometimes you weren't allowed to go and you wanted to go. There's something very often in the very first grief you had that's unfinished. And that, Bev, answers things that don't get finished will come back. Someone who thinks they've gotten past that their husband was a soldier and he died in Vietnam and they worked through that. And then their son at 18 says he wants to join the military, and they go completely to pieces. And they come saying, I can't bear this, but let's go back to the other. Am I getting too heavy here?
Well, it's grief. Let's open it up. We've gone through most of the questions in the chat, but I'm just wondering if anybody in the audience would like to speak up and share something or ask Peg verbally. Just unmute and hop in.
You asked me to say something about ABODE.
I did, yes. Say something about ABODE.
And ABODE is the gold standard to me about how people ought to make their transition. But what ABODE is doing, that dying is not a medical event. It's a spiritual event. It's a familial event. It's not a medical event. It's nice that the doctors and nurses can give us anti-anxiety meds, can give us things to keep us more comfortable, but it isn't the body knows how to do it if we'll quit doing stuff. Just be present. So that's all I need to say about ABODE. A big plug for it, but it took it out of the medical event.
Yes, and we do have somebody who's asking about grief support groups. We will start a grief support group in July. So if you're interested in that, I'll do a follow-up email about when that meets.
And there are a lot of good ones. Porter Loring runs some good ones. Churches, particularly around the holy days, run some very good ones. There's some even online. Well, ours is on Zoom. It helps to say, well, why do you want a bunch of people sitting around all being sad? There's some people that are ahead of you in their process, and that's encouraging. And there's some people who haven't gotten as far as you are, and you can, well, at least I'm not there. I believe in them. Of course, I believe in individual therapy more, but that's my deal.
The program we do is a Porter Loring program, and we do it in person at ABODE now. So we've had some nice success with that. Anybody want to unmute and offer up some thoughts?
Could I add something?
Catherine Ivy, yes, please.
I'm a chaplain at one of the Baptist hospitals. And with regard to what you said about losing your brother, we're there when someone dies, and the attention very often goes to the parents or the spouse or even the children, but the forgotten grievers are the siblings. And
yes, they are.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that till I lost my own brother. And I realized that we had missed ministering to this group of people my whole career, because I didn't realize the impact that had on on people when they lost their siblings. So it changed my practice completely. And it's a very dramatic thing. And it's different than losing a parent even. It's different.
And once you've lost both parents, y'all are up next. Mm-hmm. And that hadn't quite occurred to you in your tribe. But, you know, Catherine, people don't send friends. They send parents sympathy cards. People don't send friends sympathy cards. When you've lost your best friend, no. Why is that not? Or like a brother, they don't send you if it was your sibling.
Right.
The sympathy cards seem to be for spouses and parents.
Good point.
It's true.
Good point, Catherine.
We've had, most recently, I think of one of our guests whose brother came to visit her every day. In fact, we had guests whose brothers came every day. And it was just so sweet to see that connection right up to the very end. Ted, did you want to say something?
Hi, Peg. I have trouble accepting people who lose a pet on the same level as I would another human soul. How can I be more empathetic when someone's pet goes across a rainbow bridge?
It has to do with the degree of love they had placed there. You know, there's some people who the closest person they have is their dog. That is the closest person. And people's identification with their animals, these are sentient beings. There is a real relationship there. Do you have a pet?
Not anymore. He attacked a little Yorkshire, so we had to put him down.
For some people, that's I learned pretty quickly. It's the amount of love you've invested in whatever died. It's the amount of love you had put into that. And some people have dogs that they're outdoor dogs. They don't sleep with them every night, and it's how deep was the connection.
Yeah, you're going to have to come scrape me up when Milo goes. I just can't even imagine how I'm going to handle that.
I know. Yeah.
Who else would like to? Oh, sorry. Patty.
I've had people call me and say, I don't know if you're going to consider this legitimate grief, but my dog died. And I just rush in to say, it's the amount of love you had invested. Because I've had people who feel ashamed to say, but you know, that marriage was not any good anymore for a long time. I'm not in a lot of grief. I know it. And then they feel guilty about that. It's how much love had you put into that.
Wayne, what would you like to say?
We had a unique experience that kind of molded us and got us to this doula place let me turn on my mic.
It's on.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. And our best friend died in 100 days. He was diagnosed and died in 100 days. The weekend after he got cremated and we had a service, had a pipe ceremony for him and everything. The following Monday, I went over to see his spouse, and she was already moving things out. She was selling stuff. She was giving away stuff. And that was the beginning, and it got worse for us because Sandy and I were kind of shell-shocked after going through this. And yet this person, she's a Jewish woman, and I don't think they were in very good. He loved her like crazy. She didn't, I don't think. And so she was ready to be over with and to go to the next person. And it just like, to me, Sandy and both looked at each other and saying, this is not a way to handle grief. You don't sleep with your ex-boyfriend after you buried your husband. And that was that kind of thing for us was the pulverization moment that we were leaving. We had to leave. We changed our lives and moved to a different place. So that's how
you are right. That is abnormal. Equally abnormal is, it's called enshrining, is people who keep the room exactly as it was for 10 years. Everything. Both of those are clues to me of this is not in your best interest somewhere. You're right to identify it.
Yeah, it was really, really hard. And at some point when we knew that we moved, we didn't tell her we were moving, because she would have taken that as a betrayal. Like we were leaving her in a lurch and stuff like that. But it got harder for us because we couldn't deal with, she was living life as if it's done and I'm going on and I'm going to start dating and all this other stuff. And it's like Sandy and I are 6 months later grieving and crying over our friend. And
you know, like, where I would go with that as the therapist, but not you're her friend, is let's talk about why the marriage wasn't good.
Yeah.
I would want to, because that is a grief issue. At some point she realized, I'm guessing from what you told me, yes. But I would want to say, tell me when the marriage was good. Tell me how you met. Tell me, and then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened. I would want to get to where she turned, because that was a grief issue, that this marriage is not what she had hoped. And there will be the same disbelief. I can't believe this marriage is not going to work. There'll be the same, well, maybe if bargaining, maybe if I do this, maybe if I get him to, maybe if I, and then anger and depression. No, this would be a red flag to me, but so is enshrining the room for 5 years of not moving anything or leaving the message machine that says, hi, this is Ben, leave us a message. And when I call her and that's still on the machine for 3 years, not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, what is that about? Or to change the message. It always said, hi, this is Ben. And the next day it says, you have reached Martha. Those things would concern.
Yeah, I think.
Patty, thank you so much. I'm just looking at our time, and what a wonderful program. We're so grateful to you for sharing this time and your expertise and your experiences with us. I want to let you all know that next Thursday we have Dr. Jeffrey Benzik, and he's going to talk about our brains on grief and what actually happens to the brain. And Peg spoke a bit about that. He'll go into more depth. And then the following Thursday, we have a panel of women who have recently lost their husbands, and they will talk about their journey through grief. We have some lively events coming up. We have our ABODE Spring Art Show. If you're here in San Antonio, we invite you to come on Saturday, May 6th from 5 to 8 at the Church of Reconciliation, and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 1. We have a wonderful art show, and the proceeds benefit ABODE and they benefit the artists, and we'd love to see you there in person. So I will follow up with an email tomorrow. And if there are any extra questions that you have for Bev, with Peg or Bev. Bev can also answer lots of questions. We'll be sure to get those answered for you. So thank you all very, very much.
Yes,
for your
thank
time.
you all. And Haley.
Thank you. Thank you, Peg. Enjoyed it very much, Peggy.
Thank you. Yes, very much. Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Peg.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
How do we do this?
Me too, Peggy. How do we do this?
How do we get out of here?
Well, we could just talk.
Yeah. Hey, Lynn. Our conversation was fabulous the other day. Okay.
Yes,
bye-bye.
it was. Bye-bye. Bye.